We're up to Daf Chaf Beis Amid Aleph. We are a few lines into the page of Eitzim. So just to review what the Gemara had said was the Gemara was discussing but what's the source that when you donate a carbon, you don't have to supply the salt. The salt is supplied by the Beis HaMikdash. So in that discussion, the Gemara had said, the salt is like the wood. Just like the wood of the carbon is supplied by the Beis HaMikdash, meaning you don't bring the wood from home, so to the salt as well. It just had a given that the wood is supplied by the Beis HaMikdash. So now the Gemara wants to know, how do I know that? Maybe when you donate an individual carbon, you have to supply the blocks of wood from home as well. So the Gemara says, Eitzim de pshita le'latana de mishal tzibur minolin. Where does the Gemara where is the assumption, just the given, that the wood is supplied by the Lishkas HaGazos, by the Beis HaMikdash? How do I know this? How do you know that the wood is supplied by the Beis HaMikdash? Maybe you're responsible to bring the wood from home. The Tanya, because the Brisa says very clearly, the Brisa speaks it out, Yochala oimer harei alai oila. So let's say a person says, I'm going to bring an oila. So obviously you have to bring the animal from home. Yochel yavi eitzim etech beisa. You might think that you have to supply the wood as well. Just like you have to supply the animal and the libations, you might think that you have to supply the wood as well. The pasuk says, the pasuk says that the wood is on the mizbeach. The fact that the pasuk specifically says that the wood is on the mizbeach is the pasuk's way of equating wood to the mizbeach. And ma mizbeach mishel tzibur, just like the mizbeach, who pays for the mizbeach? It's paid for by the Beis HaMikdash, right? It's taken from the communal funds. If the Mizbeach breaks and they have to replace it, you don't bring it from home. So just like the Mizbeach is supplied from the funds of the Tzibar, Af Eitzim Ve'esh Mishal Tzibar, so to the wood is from the Tzibar as well. Divrei Rav Elazar bar Rav Shimon. That's the source from Rav Elazar bar Rav Shimon. Very good. So Rav Elazar bar Shimon says, the fact that the wood is compared to the Mizbeach, just like the Mizbeach is brought from the communal funds, so to the wood is from the communal funds as well. So then Rav Elazar ben Shamua adds, now it's clear from the Gemara that Rav Elazar ben Shamua agrees with Rav Elazar ben Rav Shimon that the wood is not supplied from home, the wood is supplied by the Beis HaMikdash, but he adds, Rav Elazar ben Shamua Omer, Ma Mizbeach shaloi nishtamish by hedyet, af eitzim ve'ei shaloi nishtamish by hedyet. Just like the Mizbeach, the pasuk is comparing the wood to the Mizbeach. So Rav Elazar ben Shamua takes it a step further. He says, just like the Mizbeach has to be new, right? The Beis HaMikdash, when they make a Mizbeach, they don't go to the store and take a used Mizbeach. It's got to be brand new, so to the wood has to be brand new. In other words, even when the Beis HaMikdash is supplying the wood, they can't take leftover wood from a week ago and reuse it. It's got to be specially new today. So the Gemara says, "My benayu." What's the difference in these two views? Ike benayu chadati. The machlokes is whether the wood has to be new. According to the Tanakama, it does not have to be new. If it was used by the Beis HaMikdash for other reasons, they could now repurpose it for the Mizbeach. But Elazar ben Shamua disagrees. Says the Gemara, Atiki law, you can't use used wood, meaning if the wood was used, it's disqualified. So we've had this previously. There was a whole story with David HaMelech, that David HaMelech brought a carbon. It says, "V'yomer arvona el David." Right? David HaMelech was told to bring a carbon, carbon on the spot of Arvona, who is a Plishti. I think he had. That's where the Mishkan was. And the pasuk says, "V'yomer arvona el David." Arvona said to David, "Yikach v'yal adoni HaMelech hatay be'einav." Take it, right? This is where David HaMelech is buying the spot where the Mizbeach and where the Beis HaMikdash is going to be. He says, take it and please use it for your best of abilities. Re'ei habakar la'oila, take the animals for the oila. V'hamorgim ukli bakar la'etzim, and take the marigim and the cattle gear for wood. Now, we'll get to what marigim is in a second. You see that Arvana took his materials and donated as firewood for the carbon. L'chora, those materials were used, right? You go to a farmer and he's got stuff, it's usually used. So isn't this used and you're using it as firewood? So you see, could you use? So the Gemara says, who said it was used? It was brand new. It was brand new materials that were never used before. Okay. Now he offered, as part of the firewood, the marigim. The Gemara always does this. My marigim, what are the marigim? Amar ula mita shatarbel. It's a tarbel bed. My mita shatarbel, what is that? Amar Yehuda iza de kurkasa. It's a goat-shaped weight placed on a spiked board. They would basically have a spiked board, and the goat would stand on it and, I guess, drag it, and it was some sort of part of the threshing process. Didashu b'shatoi, in which they thresh the grain. Amr of Yosef, Mikra, what's the source that explain this? Hine samticha lemoirig charutz chadash bal pipios tidash harim. I made you a new sharp morig with many sharp edges that you shall thresh mountains. So you see that that's what it was used for. Okay, new topic, and this is going to take us into the discussion of bittul. Mishnah says like this: Nisariv kumtza b'kaimitz chaver. You have a kaimitz. The kaimitz is meant to be burnt. I have a kaimitz, and Menachos has a kaimitz. Okay? The Kehanim accidentally mix them together. So they don't know which one is which. They're all touching each other. They don't know which one is which. The halacha is, now they're both meant to be burnt. It's not like one is meant to be eaten, one is meant to be burnt. They're both meant to be burnt. They get mixed together. Or b'minchas Kehanim. Or it became mixed with the minchas kehanim, which is also meant to be burnt. Or minchas kai Mashiach, which is also meant to be burnt. Or minchas esachim, which is also meant to be burnt, kosher. In all these cases, it is a kosher. Now, wait a minute. Why is it kosher? Usually when you have a mixture, that's a problem, right? When you have two items mixed together, they lose their identity. So why over here is it okay? So the Tanakama Shita is, two karbonos are not mevatel each other. Ein oilin mevatlin zeh, which means that when you have two items that are meant to be brought on the Mizbeach and they get mixed together, there is no problem. As we'll see, the source, I'll just say that outside, the source was that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol took the blood of the bull in one bowl, the blood of the sa'ir in the other bowl, and mixed it together. Let me ask you a question. Which one has more blood? A bull or a goat? A bull, obviously. Usually when you take two items and you mix it together, the majority wins. So when you mix it together and then they put it on the four corners, they sprinkle to them. I don't understand. Usually when you mix things together, you lose the identity of the smaller one. The very fact that you can do this tells you, says the Tanakama, karbonos are not mevatel each other. Even when they're mixed together, they're looked as if they're separate. Okay. Comes Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda says, not so fast. B'minchas koyin Mashiach, b'minchas nesachim psula. If the kaimitz became mixed with the minchas koyin Mashiach or the minchas nesachim, then it's a problem. Why? You see like this. Rav Yehuda's shita is, if they're like items, they're identical. It's called min b'minoi. Rav Yehuda's shita is that min b'minoi is not batal. If you have two items that are the same, they're not batal. That's Rav Yehuda's shita throughout Shas. Which means if I have a cup of wine and another cup of wine, they get mixed together, there's no bittul. We look at them as if they're separate. So over here, there are two different komitzim. Komitz is a komitz. They should mix together, should be fine. Then there's no bittul. Rav Yehuda says it depends which one. The average komitz was 1 isaron to 1 lug of oil. 1-to-1 ratio. It was pretty, it was like a cake batter. It was like a cookie batter. It was like a cookie dough. That was the consistency. But minchas nesachim and minchas koyin Mashiach was 1 isaron to 3 lug of oil. And it poured like a pancake batter. So says Rav Yehuda, if the pancake batter mincha mixed in with the cookie dough mincha, then it's a problem. Why? There's much more oil in the minchas nesachim and the minchas koyin Mashiach because it has much more oil. So what ends up happening is they get mixed together. The oil from the minchas koyin Mashiach is given over partially to the standard kaimitz, which now the standard kaimitz has too much oil, which is a problem. The standard kaimitz gives over some of its flour to the other one, so now, and absorbs some of the oil, so the minchas nesachim now is diminished in its amount of oil, and it's a problem. So even though they're like mine, but because they have different oil amounts, it's a problem. Says Rav Yehuda, Zubli la'ava, v'zubli la'racha, v'hin boilin zeh, and they absorb from each other, and because they absorb oil from each other, the one that was supposed to have less oil now has too much, the one that was too much now has too little, and therefore that's the issue. Okay, so I mentioned that the Tanakama Shita is that karbonos are not mevatel each other. If you have a mixture of karbonos, it's fine. Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, what's the source for this? Tanan Hasam, Dam shenis'arev b'mayim. Okay, the halach is like this. If you have blood that gets mixed with water, so can I still do the zrika? So what's the ratio? So the halach is like this. Im yesh b'maris dam kosher. As long as it still looks like blood, right, we don't go shishim, we don't go batal barov. Our ratio is, does it still look like blood? If it's still red. If it's still red, you could do zrika. Okay, that's with blood and water. Now, what happens if the blood mixed with wine? So it's always going to be red. So what we do is, we figure out, what if the wine was water? Let's say, how much water would it be that it's no longer red? So now by wine, we would use that same amount. Nisar b'yayin ro'inoi sekilu hein mayim. Okay, nisar bedam mehem bedam chaya ra'yinaisa kilu umayim. Same thing with if you mix blood of a carbon with standard cow blood of a non-carbon, we do the same thing. We figure out what if this cow blood was water? Would it still be red? If it's still red, then it's fine, and if not, then it's a problem. Okay, comes Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, "Ein dam mevatel dam." Rav Yehuda says, "Min b'minoi is not batel. If two items are like mine, they're the same. There's no bittel. So if you have blood of a carbon that gets mixed in with blood of a non-carbon, it doesn't matter the ratio. There is no bittel, and therefore we look at them as if they're distinct, and you could still do this rika regardless of the ratio. That's Rabbi Yehuda Shita. Min b'mina is not batel. This is actually negeh, by the way. In the halacha, we don't hold this way, but it's very negeh because the concept of bittel means that one nullifies the other. So Rav Yehuda looks at it when they're both the same. How could there be nullification? There's no nullification. That's Rav Yehuda's shita. Where does Rav Yehuda get it from? So the Rav Yechanan Shnei Mikra Echad Darshu. It's all based on the following pasuk, the following premise, which is I told you on Yom Kippur. You take the bull, you have it in one bowl. They do the zrika in the Kodesh Kadashim, then they go into the Heichel to do the Pareiches. The Sawyer, same thing. Then they mix it together, and they dip in all four. The fact that they mix it together and it's still usable, what does that tell you? The Rabbanan focus on the fact that the reason why it works is because they're both karbanos. And it shows you karbanos are not mevatel each other. Rav Yehuda says, no, I don't care about karbanos. They're both blood. Min b'mida is not batel. So they both agree that in the case of the mixing of the blood, the conclusion is it is not batel each other. It's not mevatel each other. We look at them as if they're distinct, even though they're mixed in the same bowl. The question is why? Rabbi Yehuda focuses on the fact that they're both blood. Min b'mino is not batel, and he applies it to kol terakula. The Rabbanan say, no. Min b'mino would be batel each other. Let's say you have kosher wine and non-kosher the wine mixed together, it's batel. That's the Rabbanan shita. So why over here is it not? Because they're karbanos. And that applies to our Mishnah of Kometz. That's the point. Says the Gemara. They're both based on the following premise. The pasuk says, "V'lokach midam apar midam asar." Do you take the bull blood and you take the goat blood and you mix it together in Yom Kippur? Hadarva you do it. It's understood. Shedamishal par merub midamishal sar. Obviously, there's more bull blood than there is goat blood. Obviously. So what should happen here is that when you mix it together, the goat blood should be nullified by the bull blood, and it should just become a lot of bull blood. That's what it should be in halacha. So why is it not? So Rabbanan Savi, go to the next page. Mikan lo'oilin she'ein mevatlin ezeh. The Rabbanan say you see from here that karbanos are not mevatel each other. That's the halal. That's what you see from over here. It's not that it's min b'mina. I don't care min b'mina, she'ein b'mina. Karbanos are not mevatel each other. And therefore, in our Mishnah, the Rabbanan say that if you have a kaimitz that gets mixed in with another kaimitz, a lot of oil, a little oil, I don't care. They're not mevatel each other. That's the Rabbanan's conclusion. Rav Yehuda says no. Mikan lemin b'mina she'ein batel. Rav Yehuda says I'm not focusing on the fact that it's karbanos. I'm focusing on the fact that it's min b'mina. And therefore, by the way, we'll see in our Mishnah, if they were the same kaimitz, then it wouldn't be batel. But if the kaimitzim have different oil properties, then we're getting into issues. Says the Gemara, Rabbanan Sarvi Mekan Lo'ilin She'ein Mevatlin Zeh V'dil Mishum Demin. By the way, this is going to be the problem they both have, which is, I'll just say this outside. You have the two bloods that are mixed together. It should be batel, but it's not. So the question is, why not? So the Rabbanan focus on the fact that it's karbanos. Rav Yehuda focuses on the fact that it's min b'mina. So each one you could ask, maybe it's the other. Meaning you could ask the Rabbanan, you're so confident that the reason why it's not batel is because they're both karbanos. Maybe the reason why it's not batel is because it's min b'mina. And you could ask the same thing of Rav Yehuda. You're so confident the reason why it's not batel is min b'mina. Maybe it's because it's karbanos. So the Gemara says they asked the Rabbanon, maybe the reason why it's not batel is because min b'mina. How do you know that it's because it's karbanos? Maybe it's because min b'mina. Meaning, according to the Rabbanon, if you'd have two different karbanos, it would also not be batel each other, even if they're not the same species and properties. So the Rabbanan respond, the Rabbanan said, if the point was that it was min b'minai, then why does it have to be karbanos? The fact that the lesson was taught regarding karbanos tells you that that's the main factor. Okay, so they asked the Rabbanan, maybe you need both for it not to be batel. Maybe for it not to be batel, it has to be a karban and min b'minai. And to that kasha, we're not sure. And the exact same back and forth according to Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda saver mekan min b'mina she'ein batel. Rav Yehuda says the main point is that min b'mina is not batel. So they asked the Rav Yehuda, "V'dilma mishum da'oilin." Maybe the reason why it's not batal is like the Rabbanan say because it's a carbon. So he says, "Iash min oilin min be'esha enim min kidagarment. Hashid dagarment min b'mina mishum min minu." He says Rav Yehuda, "I'll tell you why. Because if that's the point, then why does it have to be that they're not the same species? The very fact that they're the same species means that's the point." So says the Gemara to Rav Yehuda, "V'dilma de'eka min b'mina v'oilin." Same kasha. Maybe it has to be both, meaning. You're applying this rule to all min b'mina. Maybe it has to be min b'mina and a carbon. Kasha, not sure. Okay. Just to finish up, and this is the last point, you have in our Mishnah, a kaimitz gets mixed in with each other. Why is it not batal? So the Rabbanan would say because they're both carbonas, and Rav Yehuda would say because it's min b'mina. They both agree it's not batal. But then the end of the Mishnah was that if you have a kaimitz that's super oily with a kaimitz that's not very oily, Rav Yehuda says it's a problem. Why? Because now you're getting the oil properties is throwing everything a whack. Too much oil going into there, too little oil going that way. It's a problem. Here's the kasha though. So what's the problem over here? The oil? Too much oil is going into too little oil. So it's an oil problem. I thought Rav Yehuda's whole shita is that min b'mina is not batal. Meaning, if one was oil and one was flour, min b'she'eno minai, one's oil, one's flour, they're not the same species. I get Rav Yehuda says that's a problem because Rav Yehuda's whole thing is it's not carbonos. It's got to be the same. If they're the same, it's fine. Mix, different, problem. So if one's oil, one's flour, totally get it. But what's the problem over here? One is too oily, and one's too little oil. So it's the oil that's going. I thought oil's not mevatel each other, because it's min b'minai, shemen b'shemen. So the question is, why is Rabbi Yehuda so bothered when one's super oily, one's not so oily? Because what? The oil is going to throw off the properties. But that's a min b'minai problem. Says the Gemara, Tanan Rav Yehuda Omer. B'minchas kayim Mashiach minisachim psula shebzu bezila ava v'zu bezila rachav and boilin zazeh. One kaimitz has of flour and oil has too much, is thicker, so it has too little oil. The other one is soupy, so it has a lot of oil. The oil from one is going to go to the other. The other one is going to get too oily, one's going to dry out the other, and it's going to throw off the properties. Says the Gemara, but why is that a problem? Min b'minayu, it's a mixture of like items, which is not nullified according to Rav Yehuda. Meaning, the issue is oil. So if it's just oil, I thought it's min b'mina. It's not batal. So we'll end with this. Amarava kasav Rav Yehuda, kol shu min b'mina v'davar acher, salak es mina k'mishe'ena v'she'ena mina rabbi olav m'vatlei. This is a concept we have in halacha. It's a tricky concept, and that is over here like this. According to Rav Yehuda, if you have two items that are the same, it's fine. They're not mevatel each other. So you'd have oil and oil, it wouldn't be a problem. Over here, what do you have? You have a mixture of oil, and flour. Rav Yehuda looks at this mixture like this. Think of it as a game of war, right? When the two items are the same, Rav Yehuda feels that's min b'mina. That's not batal. Then it's fine. When they're different, then the one that's higher wins. Over here, you have something interesting. If it was just oil, it would be like ace and ace. That's one halacha. If it was oil and flour, that's different. Over here, you have an interesting situation. You have oil and flour getting mixed with oil and flour. Rav Yehuda looks at it that in this situation, we isolate the case into two separate fights. What we first do is the one that's super soupy with the oil, the one that's not so soupy, we don't go oil against oil. What we do is we take its oil, we take the other one, we say, we're going to ignore your oil. We're going to take your flour and fight. Because we do that, that's the issue. Meaning, because it's anytime you have a mixture of min, minoi, and einoi minoi, oil against the other oil and flour are not the same. Oil and oil are the same. Rav Yehuda looks at it as we isolate the fights. We take one oil against the other one's flour, see what wins, then we take the remainder and then fight against the oil. Because of this, Rav Yehuda believes it's a problem. If it was just oil against oil, Rav Yehuda would say it's fine, it's not mevatel each other. But what ends up happening is we, for some reason, look at the oil of the dry one as if it's not here. We take the oil of the liquidy one, fight against the flour. The oil will win, nullify it, ruin the mixture. Then we reintroduce the oil, but it's too late. By the way, this is negei lahalacha. You have concepts. Min b'mina we paskin is batal b'roiv, right? Non-kosher non-kosher milk get mixed in with kosher milk, it's rov. Milk and meat is shishim. What happens if you have a mixture of kosher milk, non-kosher milk, and meat that gets all mixed together? It's this shaila. What you first do is you take the meat against the milk and fight. Then we reintroduce the kosher milk against the non-kosher milk. It's the same concept. You sort of take these two items. We don't just fight them together. What we do is, okay, we split it up and say, min b'mina fight, min b'she'ena mina fight, and separate it. Because Rabbi Yehuda feels this way, therefore it's going to be a problem in our Mishnah. I will stop there. Interesting.